17 tonight. So Revelation 17. Alright, so Revelation 17, this is the word of the Lord. And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, and I will shew unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called, and chosen, and faithful. And he saith unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks to God. So for anyone who's joining us later in Revelation or later in the series, passage sounds crazy. Revelation is crazy. And even tonight in the teaching, probably a lot of questions will come up. If you can remember them for afterwards, please ask me. Certain things will be asserted that may seem like they need to be proved. But I think we've done a good job of proving a lot of things along the way. We've kind of established a foundation from which we're working. That foundation is a preterist foundation. So preterism is a basic understanding and different understandings of how to interpret Revelation. And it's an understanding or a belief that most of Revelation was actually already fulfilled. So it's not this idea that Revelation as a whole is this future prophecy, even for us, stuff that hasn't been fulfilled yet in our lifetime, but rather the majority of Revelation has already been fulfilled, namely in AD 70 AD with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So that's the framework we're operating from, and this is a prophetic book, so there's a lot of prophetic language from John. We pulled a lot from Ezekiel. Isaiah will do more of that tonight. So that's just a brief background. But any questions that come up, there'll probably be a multitude to try to remember them for after. Revelation 16, we had the 7 vials of judgment poured out. Those were the final, God promised that after the 7th vial, basically his wrath against Israel, apostate Israel, would be fulfilled. So that's been completed. We see a transition now to a new image shown to John by one of these angels who had one of the 7 vials. Again, Revelation 17, 1 and 2. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither. I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom The kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So this picture is of a great whore sitting upon many waters. Nice soft language from John. So who is this great whore? The debate ranges depending on which interpretation you take into the book of Revelation, even within the preterist camp. But Revelation has already set the terms for our understanding of who this harlot is, who this whore is, both in the timing and the specific identity. So the timing is set because Revelation has clearly laid out that what's being talked about, even later in our text we'll see in verse 18, that the harlot is currently reigning over the kings of the earth. So when John's writing this letter, the harlot exists. It's not a future harlot, she exists now. She's currently reigning over the kings of the earth. And we know that the prophecies of Revelation, as John has said, since chapter 1, are soon to take place. The imagery has become more and more clear throughout Revelation. The New Testament church is going to be established. The way it's established, part of the way it's established, is through the destruction of the old. The kingdom of Christ, the New Jerusalem, is the virgin bride, right? So now we see this pinning of the virgin bride of Christ, the church, and then the harlot of Israel. They have cast off their God. They've declared we have no king but Caesar, given themselves over to foreign gods. So far from being established, they're now being cut off. Jerusalem's being cut off. Her name later we'll see is Babylon the Great, and she's called in verse 18 that great city. And if you remember back, we talked about this last week, but we talked about it in depth in Revelation 11. That great city is the same language used for the two prophets in Revelation 11, one representing the law and one representing the prophets. They lay dead in the city streets of that great city where our Lord was crucified. Where our Lord was crucified is Jerusalem, and so we know that Jerusalem is the city that's being talked about here. The harlot is Jerusalem. And this harlot language is not, John's not bringing something new to the table as if harlot language hasn't been used in the Bible. It's used throughout the Old Testament, specifically talking about Israel in their apostasy. That's where we see this harlotry language come up. Isaiah describes Jerusalem as turning from God in adulterous idolatry in Isaiah 1. Verse 21, he says, "How the faithful city, Jerusalem, has become a harlot. She who was once full of justice, righteousness once lodged in her, but now murderers." That's how Isaiah describes Jerusalem. Jeremiah speaks similarly in Jeremiah 2 and into chapter 3, saying Israel's been found lying as a harlot under every green tree. Every green tree in the land, Israel's whoring themselves out. He uses language of sniffing vehemently as a donkey in heat, seeking many lovers, anyone who will lie with her, polluting the land through harlotry and wickedness. And he even describes into chapter 3 of Israel having a harlot's forehead, which we've seen throughout Revelation, forehead language, right? Being marked on the forehead is used even in the Old Testament for the priests, marked out as holy to the Lord. So it's supposed to be something that marks your life, right? Whereas it's not supposed to be a surprise to people that were Christians, right? It's to be on our foreheads. So they have a harlot's forehead, which means, just think, no shame. Unashamed to be marked out as a harlot, whoring after false gods. There was pride in Israel over their harlotry. Hosea says it was rampant in the land. So, right, Jeremiah says under every green tree, and Hosea says on every threshing floor. Hosea 9:1, "Rejoice not, O Israel, for joy as other people, for thou hast gone a whoring from thy God. Thou hast loved a reward upon every corn floor," or threshing floor. Ezekiel, as many of us know, is the most graphic in their description of Jerusalem. You especially know this if you listen to Lance's preaching of Planned Parenthood. But in Ezekiel 16 and Ezekiel 23, most specifically, we have extremely graphic language to describe the harlotry of the Israelites. And we see Ezekiel 16, one of the reasons we'll go over now is because it's referenced actually throughout our chapter, which makes sense if we're going to look at Jerusalem now as the great harlot, really the culmination of this harlotry from throughout the Old Testament. They've officially cast off their God, and God is divorcing them. Some commentators literally call the book of Revelation basically a covenant divorce document from God to Israel. In Ezekiel 16 and 23, it's a passage of erotic, shameless beckoning to the false gods of both Egypt and Babylon from the Jews. The Israelites longed to be filled by these false gods. They sought out the Egyptians, Ezekiel says, because they believed them to be well endowed. That is, having large genitals with which to please the Israelites. This is the language that God uses through Ezekiel. Producing semen in horse-like quantities with which to fill them. See Ezekiel 16:26, Ezekiel 23:20. The Israelites, as described by Ezekiel, sit with legs spread wide open and do not even want payment for their services. See Ezekiel 16:25, Ezekiel 16:33 and 34. It would be their pleasure to play the whore, in other words. No money needed. This should gross you out. It should be considered horrendous, disgusting, appalling, and completely over the line. The problem is more so what we consider to be the appalling part. Is it God using this language, or is it the reality of our sin? Right? Are we offended by God and his use of this language? Because God's not wrong, right? We should always start with that presupposition. Harsh language, but God's not wrong. God's describing our sin just fine. The problem is our sin. The horrendous nature of the whole thing is not God's description through the prophet of what Israel had become in their idolatry. This is the nature of idolatry laid bare. But the fact that they would turn from their Creator who brought them out of the land of Egypt. That's what Israel had done. And in this had served other gods, served idols. God's holy. He had established himself as their God. Not just the Creator God of the whole world, but their God. They had been set apart for him, redeemed out of Egypt. And they cheated on him. So this should be seen as far more appalling to us than it typically does. We have a small view of God and his holiness and a lofty view of men, which leads us to hear passages like this and not want to associate ourselves with the whore, which is what that passage is meant to communicate to us. That's what we do. Instead, scoff at God, think it harsh on his part. Sinners from the dirt, showing abundant grace each and every day, spitting in the face of God who sustains them in all that they do and has given them every blessing they possess. Truly, God was, if anything, light in his description of the grotesque nature of adulterous idolatry. It's a small window into the stench of our sin. You think about the culture of our day, applying this to the way we look at children, right? It's one of the reasons we're outside of Planned Parenthood on Saturdays, is because it's a sin of our day for children to basically just be led to the slaughter as if it's nothing. And now you have Christians. Dave and I were looking and seeing just like registered Democrats, Christians with no issue in their conscience voting for Biden when he's completely fine with promoting the slaughter of children. Are you kidding me? It's disgusting. How much are children despised today? Children are laid on the altar of personal convenience, selfish ambition. We see that at abortion mills every time we're out there on Saturdays, but it's happening literally every day. COVID hit. I think we were probably just wrong. But somebody told us that Planned Parenthood were closed for a little while. It probably wasn't even true. But regardless, they were open well before churches were allowed to open. Children still being led to the slaughter, even with supposed great danger to the public. Children are laid on this altar, and Christians are guilty of this and other methods of despising the blessing of children. Right? There's plenty of Christians who justify abortions and then use abortive methods of birth control just simply out of personal convenience. That's just easier. You could literally be killing your kids, right? The Bible's clear that sex is not to be manipulated into an object for pleasure that's divorced from the beauty and blessing of children. That's not our decision to make. But how often do Christians on a more broad level simply just despise the gift of children? There are Christians using abortive methods of birth control, as I mentioned, while others are more conscientious in their methods, but still with an eye toward years of barrenness. Years of barrenness for their wives, for the sake of a more established college fund, for securing a home, all these worldly things. And it's a massive ceding to the gods of the age. That's what it is. A willingness to serve them above our God who promises us, it's a promise, to provide for us and to protect us. He promises that and at the same time demands godly offspring from redeemed families. So both of those are true. He's going to provide and protect for us. He clothes the lilies of the field. How much more? It's an argument from lesser to greater. How much more is he going to take care of his children? We are quicker to trust in gods of self, status amongst those around us, worldly successes. We live in the midst of a church culture that's bowed the knee to feminism in massive ways. It's a rot not just in our culture, but in the church. And it's not uprooted simply by talking about different roles between men and women. That doesn't uproot feminism in the church. Because that's not it. The only way to uproot sinful ideologies in the church is to turn to the Bible, right? So we can't come up with another worldly wisdom and then try to apply that over and against a worldly ideology. We need to turn to the Bible. So look at a text like 1 Corinthians 11 and see man is the head of woman. That's a creational reality. So not just an arbitrary role assignment, but a creational reality, and then apply that to our culture, apply that to the church. In case it's not clear, that's a knock on complementarianism, which clearly just tries to distinguish between role and not nature. Which being said, there is not a difference in value in the eyes of God by any means. Men and women are co-heirs with Christ, but nature, we have different natures. Men and women are not created the same, they're created different. Man is the head of woman. We need to talk about creation, we need to talk about nature. The church has also bought into the American dream. Have 2, maybe 3 kids. You can have a 4th, but it better be by adoption. Right? That's the Christian version of the American dream. In fact, we see the entire definition of what success looks like to a God-hating culture. Since when did success biblically for our families have anything to do with the size of your home, ensuring all your children have their own rooms, or obtaining a practically useless 4-year college degree? Andy would amen that if she heard it. Since when did success biblically, good to see you guys. Since when did success biblically mean sterilizing our marriage beds to pursue dual careers in our homes? Why is it so commonplace and accepted for those in the church to despise the gift of God, something objectively called a gift by God? Or for others who bear the name of Christ, when did it become okay to make a handful of orphan children in petri dishes just so you can try to secure a select few biological children that you feel entitled to? Christians are called to care for orphans, right? Adoption is a beautiful thing. Christians should certainly be involved in adoption. I don't think over and against biological children, but we certainly shouldn't be in the business of making orphans, which is unfortunately commonplace within Christianity today. It's certainly a sin of our day, but is it reasonable to apply Ezekiel's language in chapter 16 to the way babies are thought of in our society today, in the church, in the society? Well, Ezekiel 16, down in verse 20 and 20 through 22 says, Moreover, thou hast taken thy sons and thy daughters whom thou hast born unto me, and these hast thou sacrificed unto them to be devoured. Is this of thy whoredoms a small matter, that thou hast slain my children and delivered them, to cause them to pass through the fire for them? And in all thine abominations and thy whoredoms, thou hast not remembered the days of thy youth, when thou wast naked and bare and wast polluted in thy blood. If you're familiar with Ezekiel 16, it starts with basically this picture of Israel as this baby wallowing in its own blood. And God picks it up out of that blood, commands it to live, breathes life into it, cleans it up, and as she matures, adorns her with all these beautiful gifts, right? Clothes her, gives her gold, jewelry, and she despises it. Doesn't receive it with humble gratitude, presumes upon it, and plays the whore. Recognize that this whole Ezekiel 16 text, this idea, is a better understanding of your sin than how you normally think of them. When you sin, you cheat on God. It's adultery. When you cheat on God, it's like the Israelites described in chapter 16 and 23 of Ezekiel. And likewise, your participation in your sins is voluntary and willing. You're not a victim. It's voluntary and willing. We need to own that when we sin. There's much to be ashamed of. Your sins before God are horrific. He hates sin with a holy hatred infinite and eternal. This is the reality that should be set in our minds when we come in confession of our sin before God's throne. And yet, remember that you approach that throne, when you're covered in the blood of Christ, as a throne of grace with boldness and confidence. That's what Hebrews tells us. We approach with boldness and confidence. So that's the dynamic, the tension we hold. You come as a wretch in and of yourself, but we come clothed in the blood of Jesus. If we're trusting in Him, we come clothed in His righteousness. It's not a blood that's sufficient for cute and petty sins. That's not what the blood of Jesus is. That's not who receives forgiveness. Everyone receives forgiveness who comes to Him asking for mercy. Right? If you come asking for mercy, truly, from a regenerate heart given by God, you'll receive mercy. Seeing the reality of our sin, seeing yourself for the harlot you are, only shows the magnitude of the sacrifice of Christ. He died for wicked sins, for wicked people. See the magnitude of His sacrifice, the weight of our sins lifted from us and put upon Him. Right? God is just, so it's not just lifted from us, but lifted from us and put upon Him. So greater gratitude for His sacrifice when we see our sin for what it is, and the greatness of God's love for sinners. Jerusalem did not receive this gift of repentance like we talked about last week You see judgment upon judgment upon judgment, and all we have from the Jews is more blasphemies. Every time God brings a judgment, the Jews just blaspheme more. Jerusalem had continued in their whoredom to the point that God was now cutting her off, divorcing her. She had, as we have seen, filled up the wrath of God. The great whore Jerusalem is sitting upon, we read, many waters, which is a reference to Babylon, which we talked a lot about last week, but this time from Jeremiah 51. Jeremiah 51, verses 6 through 13. Flee out of the midst of Babylon, and deliver every man his soul. Be not cut off in her iniquity. For this is the time of the Lord's vengeance. He will render unto her a recompense. Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand, that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine. Therefore the nations are mad. And that verse 7 is a parallel to our text. Right? Babylon had made the land drunk in fornication and abominations to God, and Israel had done the same. Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her, take balm for her pain. If so be, she may be healed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her. And let us go every one into his own country, for her judgment reacheth unto heaven, and is lifted up even to the skies. The Lord hath brought forth our righteousness. Come and let us declare in Zion the work of the Lord our God. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes. For his device is against Babylon, to destroy it. Because it is the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple. Set up the standard upon the walls of Babylon. Make the watch strong. Set up the watchmen, prepare the ambushes, for the Lord hath both devised and done that which he spake against the inhabitants of Babylon. O thou, and this is the reference to our text, O thou that dwellest upon many waters, abundant in treasures, thine end is come, and the measure of thy covetousness. The waters represent abundant blessings from the hand of God. Specifically, it's a reference to the Euphrates River, which made the land of Babylon extremely fruitful. The harlot is linked to Babylon with this reference to many waters, sitting upon many waters. And we've seen already this connection between Babylon the Great and Jerusalem. Despite these many blessings, Babylon did not serve the Lord, but rather turned the nations against God. And think about the use of the phrase many waters as it's been used in Revelation thus far. It's used to describe the voice of Jesus all the way back in chapter 1. And we see it used in the Old Testament to describe angels praising God in Ezekiel. This woman, like Babylon of old, had great blessings from God. Who were the Jews but the receivers of the oracles of God? The receiver of the words of the prophets. They were guided by the hand of God through many trials, lived lives under his blessing. Still, this harlot turned from God to serve idols. She killed the prophets. Like we read Jesus, Jesus is talking with the Jews. He says, you follow your fathers who killed the prophets, and they proved that, right? If they wanted to scoff at that at the time, they proved that when they killed the Messiah himself, when they crucified Jesus. As we've seen, the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. And yet another parallel to this text from Jeremiah 51, looking at Babylon, the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. Remember, the earth or the land is a reference to the whole people of Israel, which we've seen throughout Revelation. The beast from the land, the religious leaders in Israel, of apostate Israel, had forsaken Christ and had sacked up with Rome. The chief priests, as we've looked at multiple times, cried out in John 19, "We have no king but Caesar." The Jews, given the Messiah from God, that's the dynamic. Jesus comes in the flesh. Do you want me to release to you your king? Or do you want this murderer Barabbas, which is crazy? I feel like we gloss over that, but it's like, think of a murderer locked up, there's people like rejoicing. And yet there's a willingness to have Barabbas. Give us the murderer. Give us the threat to our children, our families, and kill him. We have no king but Caesar. In doing this, in rejecting Christ and committing fornication with Rome, idolatrous fornication, the Jewish leaders led their people into the same idolatry. They made them drunk with their fornication. We'll see more about the specific contents making up this cup, this fornication, later in the chapter. Verse 3, "So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns." Most of the visions we've seen in Revelation have been from the view of heaven, right? We've seen The scroll was in heaven. The trumpet blasts were in heaven. Jesus walking amidst the candlesticks. All these were heavenly visions, and now John's brought down by one of these angels with the 7 vials to see a vision in the wilderness, which is a fitting place biblically for this cursed woman and the cursed beast she's riding upon. The harlot woman is now seen seated upon a scarlet-colored beast. We have a color reference to the dragon in chapter 12 as being red, and this beast is said to be scarlet. The beast appears to be the same beast from the sea from Revelation 13, which, if you were with us, we identified that beast from the sea as Rome. I think we have that on our podcast on Stone Mountain Media, if you can check it out there, or we have it certainly in blog form, our teaching through Revelation 13, but we identified the beast of the sea as Rome, and then one of the heads of that beast being Nero, who was the current Caesar at the time John was writing. But the details link this beast also with the dragon of chapter 12. He has the same 7 heads and 10 horns, which both the dragon and the sea beast have earlier in Revelation. And he's again linked with the imagery of rising up out of the water like a sea beast, right? The beast from the sea. We have the added description of his color, which last time was specific to the dragon. We weren't given a color for the beast in Revelation 13. But we see that the beast is full of blasphemous names, and that was a description given to the beast of the sea. So I think the addition of the scarlet color, that's really the only addition to the description, which is similar to the red given to the dragon in chapter 12, simply draws an even clearer parallel between the dragon and the beast. Right? We already saw this dynamic of the beast being made in the image of the dragon. Right? It's kind of this unholy trinity is what's set up, and so this beast from the sea is made in the image of the dragon. And so some commentators would say it flips here to the beast basically being the dragon himself. But I think it's consistent to see this still as the beast being Rome, and I think that will be made more plain as we go through the text. Satan had certainly established Rome, right? We know that Satan is working through Rome. He'd established them, and he sought to raise them up as his greatest weapon in extinguishing the early young Christian church. Let's look at verses 4 and 5. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. The woman is dressed luxuriously. This is hearkening again back to Ezekiel 16. God was the giver of these precious items. Israel's decked with all the blessings of God. All the blessings of God is what makes her beautiful. He washed her when she was wallowing in her blood, gave her life, and clothed her with splendor. This woman's not marked by gratitude for these gifts and loyalty to God for his redemption, but instead used them to play the whore. Even the cup of her fornication, we read, is decked with gold, which is similar to the cup from Jeremiah 51. And it's a perfect imagery of the harlot herself, perfect imagery of the language Jesus uses against the Pharisees, right? Whited sepulchres, gorgeous on the outside, full of decay on the inside. Inside, she's full of abominations and filthiness, John says, as the fruit of her fornication. Her forehead, again, is marked, and we've seen that throughout Revelation, rather than holy to the Lord. So everybody's been marked out in Revelation, right? You have holy to the Lord upon the faithful, and then you have the mark of the beast upon all the worshipers of the beast, which encompasses everybody who's not worshiping Jesus. On the harlot's forehead is written Mystery, Babylon the Great, and the mother of harlots. The mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. If you think back to Revelation 10, that's the first time we see mystery language come up. And it's similar to how it's used in Ephesians 3:5. Mystery in the New Testament is not a reference to some hidden riddle, but it's something that was concealed and is now revealed, namely the reality that the gospel is now going out to the nations. God's making one new people from the two, from Jew and Gentile. He's making one new people and making peace between them through his cross. Revelation 10 describes the inescapable reality. This is how it links to it being on the head of the harlot, because it's kind of a weird combination. You think, well, it's a proclamation of the gospel. Why is it upon the harlot's head? Well, Revelation 10, if you remember, describes the inescapable reality that the destruction of Jerusalem was tied up in the fulfillment of the establishment of the new covenant people. So long as the temple stood, a semblance of the old covenant stood. But God was tearing that down, building the new Jerusalem. And so this was necessary in the fulfillment of the coming of the gospel, the establishment of the new covenant. The mystery was once hidden, but now it's being revealed. The harlot's also called Babylon the Great, for she has taken on the role of the enemy of God. Babylon is described as an enemy of God in the Old Testament. It's a type, and it's fulfilled here in the Jews in Jerusalem, in the apostate Israelites, as the enemy of God's people. She's the mother of harlots and abomination. Again, a title given actually by Ezekiel in Ezekiel 16. It's Ezekiel 16, 44 through 48. Ezekiel's called the mother of harlots and abominations. Let's look at verses 6 and 7. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. Not only were the kings of the nations drunk, but the woman herself was made drunk with the blood of the saints and the martyrs of Jesus. And this is the content of her golden cup. Right? She's holding this cup. It's the wine of her fornication. It's filled with blood. It's filled with the blood of saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Remember the picture painted in the book of Acts. It's not one of passivity on the part of the Jews. The Jews are the antagonists in the book of Acts, constantly persecuting the Christians. Not only had the Jews historically slain the prophets, right? That has marked out the Jews over time. They'd slain the prophets. But they were presently seeking to outpace Rome in their persecution of the Christians, of the Church of God. The culmination of this view made John wonder with great admiration. He's looking upon this woman, this harlot, this whore, with great admiration, which is positive language. It's not like simply taken back, but enthralled. It's the same. Wonder is the same word that's used in Revelation 13 to talk about the worshipers of the beast who received the mark on his head. They wondered after the beast. John's here wondering after the whore with great admiration. Although we may look with disgust from the outside, right, pulling Ezekiel 16, it's not that enticing to look upon this woman, but we're not beholding her like John was. John was enticed. The harlot was pleasing to look at, even though her way led to death. This is the same word used again in Revelation 13. The angel sees the look on John's face, so to speak, slaps him upside the head. He asks him why he marvels. It's a rebuke from the angel. And the application is plain. Sin often looks enticing and doesn't always look as disgusting as it truly is. Sin always brings forth death. That's the nature of sin. But that doesn't mean it's not going to look good. It's a temptation. Part of a temptation means we want it. The angel tells John he will explain this scene, both the woman and the beast that she's riding. Fighting temptation often involves preaching the truth to ourselves, even when it's not the most pressing reality on our minds. So you want something, and we need to realize that our desires are fickle, they're fleeting, and so in those seasons, or in those moments, we're called to pray, remember the truth of God. If you're not steeped in the Word of God, when temptation comes, you don't have a lot of weapons from which to fight, with which to fight. So arm yourself with the Word of God. Remember to pray, because we receive strength from God. We're not meant to overcome these things in and of ourselves. But preach in the midst of temptation to yourself. Be the kind of friend that preaches truth in the midst of temptation to others. The beast that thou sawest, is verse 8. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. So the beast was and is not and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. That's what it's going to do, but only to be delivered again into perdition. Then at the end of verse 8, the phrase is repeated with a slight alteration. The beast that was and is not and yet is. Some commentators again see this beast as Rome, while others see it as a combination of Rome and the dragon. I think Rome continues to hold true as the clearest identity of the beast, and I think we see a correlation here made with the second person of the Trinity, right, the Son of God, who was and is to come in Revelation 1. So we see that correlation again. I think that solidifies it even further as Rome that we're looking at here. And though the beast rises up to make war, his end remains to go into perdition. So he's going to be brought up, right, seemingly defeated, but he's going to be brought up to go to war. Jesus had delivered the ultimate death blow to all the wicked kingdoms of the earth in his death on the cross and in his resurrection from the dead. And he said it's finished. But this reality was still being worked out in time. God still had a plan for using these demonic kingdoms, as we'll see, to his purposes. Because of this, we read that the beast yet is. This parallel is also seen by some commentators as an explanation, this part of him being, that he yet is, as an explanation for how Vespasian is going to be the future emperor of Rome to kind of lead this conquest with the beast. But I think we actually have a more fitting explanation later in our text. Those who wondered at the beast were those who, we read, did not have their names written in the book of life. So the fundamental reason given for their idolatrous worship. Their names were not written in the book of life. They were not chosen of God, and therefore they were left in their sin. And therefore Christ was for them, as Peter says, a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. This was the appointed end of the worshipers of the beast. Right? This was God's design for them. Peter says it in 1 Peter 2, verses 6 through 9. Wherefore also it is contained in the scripture, Behold, I lay in Zion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. Unto you therefore which believe, he is precious. But unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto also they were appointed. So they're actively disobedient, but this is the end to which they were appointed. But ye, speaking to the Christians, are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness and into his marvelous light. So verses 9 and 10. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. I think here the identity of the beast is made even more plain for us. John uses a similar introduction line when he told us about the identity of the beast specifically as Nero. Remember he says, he who has an ear, hear, he who has wisdom, rather, hear. The number of the beast, the mark of the beast, the number of his name, and then he tells us it's a reference to 666, which is a reference to Nero Caesar using a mathematical style called gematria. And he tells us here that the 7 heads are 7 mountains. Remember back to the first time we looked at the beast from the sea, the city of 7 hills was a description of Rome. So he's making very plain here, this is Rome, the city of 7 mountains or 7 hills. That's a geographic identification of the beast as Rome. The 7 heads are also represent, we read, 7 kings, which tells us where we are in the history of Rome. So the 7 hills just tell us that we're in Rome, and now I think this helps us to understand the timing. It says the first 5, I think this is the time of the Caesars. The first 5 were already dead, right? They were. And that'd be Julius, Augustus, Tiberius, who was reigning when John the Baptist and Jesus were performing their ministries on earth. And then after Tiberius, you have Caligula and Claudia. One we read currently is, and I believe that's Nero. I think that's been established from Revelation 13. And the other is yet to come. So Galba was the next Caesar to come. And so there's a divide in commentators over whether or not it's Galba, who only reigned about 6 months. And then right after him, you have Otho and Vitellius. But the combination of all 3 of them were all in 1 year. You remember last week we looked at Revelation 16, and the only judgment vial that is poured out on Rome is poured out and there's darkness that falls upon the land. And I think that was that year of basically infighting between Rome, a year of basically orgies and civil wars. Is basically the year that Rome had, as we saw in Revelation 16. Rome was thrown into that. And let's look at verses 11 and 12. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th and is of the 7th and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as of yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. The political upheaval in Rome looked to have possibly spelled the end of the beast. But this beast would rise from the bottomless pit under its 8th king, or Caesar, one distinct from, not in the same line, but very much like the previous 7, that being Vespasian. Vespasian began a new dynasty when he left the siege of Jerusalem to his son Titus and took over affairs in Rome, restored order. He too would go into perdition. The 10 horns are 10 kings, which we've seen as subservient to the beast, right? They're serving the beast, deriving their power from the beast in this hour of war. Though there were 10 provinces in Rome, each with their own rulers, 10 is also a number of completeness in the Bible. So again, we're looking at Revelation as a whole as a prophetic book. So as a prophetic book, chiefly, when we hear prophetic language, 10 is a prophetic number, prophetically in the Bible represents completeness. So think all the kings. But we've seen parallels to realities that are taking place in Rome, in Jerusalem. So that may be what's being referred to, but I think primarily we have to see this as a fullness of the kings of the earth setting themselves up against Jesus. And they're doing this to make war. Verses 13 and 14. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. So these kings are described as having one mind. All the kings agree. They agree that they should band together and fight against Christ. It becomes a unifying point for them. They make war with the Lamb. I should remind you of Psalm 2. This is the first 3 verses of Psalm 2. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. These rulers have no problem uniting for a common cause, and that being to fight against God by persecuting, namely the church. Right? Jesus has ascended to heaven. It's kind of untouchable at this point. But if you want to attack Jesus, you attack his people, the church. Hating Jesus has brought enemies together as friends since Jesus came. Right? Luke 23:12. In the same day, Pilate and Herod were made friends together, for before they were at enmity between themselves. Once it came to persecuting Jesus, they're made best friends. Because of the hatred for Christ today, Dave and I were talking about this yesterday, you see the president of France welcoming in hordes of Muslims, right, under the name of diversity being their strength, bringing them in by the tens of thousands. And this is asking for trouble, historically, just welcoming in hordes of Muslims. And so you have to think, what is it that they're gaining in this transaction? Why are they doing this? Well, one thing it's helping is accomplish positively for France is undermining the Christian influence, the Christian backbone of their community, of their nation, right? So there's plenty that they disagree on, but here's one thing we agree on. Let's undermine Western culture. Let's undermine Christianity. Let's cast off Christ. France is willing to usher in danger on one level because in their cost-benefit analysis, there's a higher goal, and that higher goal is to push the lordship of Christ further from their view. Right? We know Christ has been given the nations as his inheritance, so ultimately it's a work of folly, but that's what they seek to do. Unbelievers would rather take the risk of allying with dangerous groups because Jesus is a greater threat to them. Jesus, in their mind, is a greater threat to them. The consequences of such alliances can cost them dearly, and that's what we see happen to the harlot. Right? If you think back to the text we read, at the end of the text, the harlot is eaten and burned. She's stripped naked, eaten and burned by the beast that she worshipped. So she made an alliance, and then that alliance devours her. But they're willing to do this for the sake of casting off Christ. And yet all these alliances, right, all these treaties between the enemies of God to war against him, were that which God had set forth for them in his wise and holy counsel. Acts 4:26-28. Kings of the earth stood up, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. For of a truth against thy holy child Jesus, whom thou hast anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, were gathered together for to do whatsoever thy hand, that is God's hand, and thy counsel determined before to be done. We read that the Lamb shall overcome these persecutors of his church. Why? Because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. So gather all the kings of the earth together, he's king of them all. All the lords of the earth together, he's Lord of them all. Jesus is the sovereign one. He's upholding the wicked rulers in their rebellion. So when he decides to crush their opposition, it's over. It's not a competition. No contest. Those with Jesus, we read, are the called, the chosen, and the faithful. That's all Christians. With the Lamb as our head, our resurrected and ascended King, the church joins Christ in his victory. We join Christ in his victory, which means, as we've seen throughout Revelation, Christians, not in a vindictive way, not in a bloodlust way, are to rejoice in the just judgments of God. Revelation has been chock full of the just judgments of God, and Christians are called to rejoice in that. It's going to be really hard to read the Psalms if you don't have that imagery in your head, because the Psalms are full of that. I was reading Psalm 58 this week, and there's dancing in the blood of the wicked. So that's a reality in the Scriptures. Now, if we come with self-righteousness to that, as if we're owed salvation, and then the wicked are, wicked get their just deserts and we get our just deserts. Salvation, right? Unless we see salvation as the gift that it is, we're not gonna come to that rejoicing rightly. We're rejoicing in the just judgments of God, rejoicing in God's character. Let's look at verses 15 through 18. And he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. It's a horrible ending. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city. Again, the identity of the woman, which reigneth over the kings of the earth. The woman is again that great city, Jerusalem. She is the horse sitting upon many waters, representing, we read, peoples, multitudes, and nations and tongues. The Jews had the oracles of God. Right? No one else was given the oracles of God. There wasn't another set somewhere else. The Jews had this, and their synagogues were in cities throughout the land. So they had an influence throughout the Roman Empire. The 10 horns, the rulers of the earth, we read, hate the whore. The whore had worshipped them. We have no king but Caesar. And yet we read that the 10 horns, these rulers who have banded together against Christ, hate the whore. She's not beloved by the beast on which she rides, but is hated. Therefore the beast makes her desolate and naked. He strips the whore of her costly attire and leaves her bare, which is the same punishment given to the adulteress in the Old Testament. The beast, we read, shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. The eating of flesh is a reckoning back to Jezebel from 1 Kings 21. Her flesh is eaten by dogs. That was her end. And Ezekiel 16, 37 through 41 spells out the rest of the judgment due to Israel and her unfaithfulness to the covenant. So we come back to Ezekiel 16, verses 37 through 41. Behold, therefore, I will gather all thy lovers. You want to commit fornication with the nations? I'll gather all your lovers with whom thou hast taken pleasure, and all them that thou hast loved. With all them that thou hast hated, I will even gather them round about against thee, and I will discover thy nakedness unto them, that they may see all thy nakedness, and I will judge thee as women that break wedlock and shed blood are judged. You're going to be judged as an adulteress. And I will give thee blood and fury and jealousy. And I will also give thee into their hand, and they shall throw down thine eminent place, and shall break down thy high places. They shall strip thee also of thy clothes, and shall take thy fair jewels, and leave thee naked and bare. They shall also bring up a company against thee, and they shall stone thee with stones, and thrust thee through with their swords. And they shall burn thine houses with fire, and execute judgments upon thee in the sight of many women. And I will cause thee to cease from playing the harlot. And thou also shalt give no hire any more. In terms of applying this to Jerusalem, in terms of the actual destruction that came upon Jerusalem, it was horrific. Read Josephus and hear of the horrors that took place in this time when Jerusalem was destroyed by Rome and by neighboring empires, kings that joined with Rome in the slaughter. Whole cities like Caesarea were killed in a day. Josephus records the slaughter of over 50,000 Jews in Alexandria, bodies heaped up in the streets. The hatred was strong, the judgment was severe. Israel's own idol, as we looked at more in depth last week, that which the whore had worshipped and the thing which she had trusted in, crushed her. This is a reminder that the devil doesn't love you, he hates you. Serve the devil and be crushed. That's the fruit of idolatry every time. Service to him results in your destruction. Why the hatred? Well, we have two reasons given for this hatred. There's two reasons for the hatred of the beast, or of the harlot from the beast. On one end, our text tells us the ultimate reason, for God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will. Right? Just like think about Ezekiel 16. You want to play this role, you want to play the whore. Well, God has a judgment for that. God has a way to deal with that. And so God put it in the heart of Rome, of the Roman beast, to hate the harlot, to devour the harlot. It was the will of God. It was a judgment from him. For the beast also, those who had given their power over to the beast, this was a war against Christ. Right? The Roman leaders saw a deep connection from the outside, which is reasonable, between Christianity and Judaism. Christianity had basically sprung up out of Judaism, and so they saw it as having the same foundation, Christianity being a branch of Judaism. Therefore, the destruction of the temple was an attempt by Rome on one level, and the nations in cahoots with Rome, to destroy Christianity as well. There's quotes from Titus, the general who besieged Jerusalem, explaining that being his view. Seeing the destruction of the temple as an opportunity to undermine both the Jews, who he hated, and the Christians. To his dismay, as our text says, this was the fulfillment of the perfect will of God. God was working all this for his purposes. Contrary to Titus's understanding, this was actually an establishment. Not an undermining, but an establishment of the plan of God. God wanted all of this to take place. This gathering of the nations against Christ, their submission to the beast, and uniting their wills against Jesus, lasted, as our text says, only until the words of God should be fulfilled. This is true of every circumstance in our life, no matter the depth of the difficulty. Right? Every circumstance in our life, every trial, every sorrow, those trials last as long as it takes for the word of God to be fulfilled. When God's will is fulfilled, when his plan comes about, it's over. We always seek to cast our anxieties on God, remind ourselves and one another that God loves us, that he works all things for our good. Right? That never changes. Nothing's ever outside of his plan. This great city had reigned over the earth. God had made a covenant with Israel. They were the chosen people of the old covenant, meant to be a light to the nations. That was their purpose. They were meant to be a light to the nations. But this great city, which had led many astray, rather than being a light to the nations, they had become the nation that when they went out to make a disciple, a proselyte, they made him twice the child of hell that they themselves were. That's the kind of discipleship that they were doing. They have now finally been disowned by God, cut off, given over to their idols to be devoured and cast off, as the covenant breakers that they had become. According to the definite plan of God, the true Israel, the church, was being firmly established. All this was to the purpose of God to firmly establish the church as his ultimate covenant people, to reign with Christ as he conquers all of his foes and brings a kingdom that will never be destroyed, a kingdom with no end. Let's pray.